Hello and welcome to another Office 365 Hours. My name is Christian Buckley and I'm the Microsoft Go-to-Market Director here at AvePoint and a Microsoft MVP and Regional Director. And I'm joined today by Laurent Carlier, a fellow Office Apps and Services MVP and a Microsoft 365 Modern Workplace Consultant based out of France. Good morning, Laurent.
Yeah, good morning, Christian. Thanks for having me in the show and happy to share a session with you and AvePoint.
I know there's a lot of interest in this topic, so I'm excited to get underway. And of course, we're discussing creating the perfect Microsoft Teams setup for education. And I know that you just had a blog posted over to the AvePoint blog on this topic. You've done a lot of work. You've done a lot that's within the education industry. So let's talk through that. So why don't we kick things off? What is unique about Microsoft Teams for education, and what are some of the considerations with setting it up?
Yeah, surprisingly, few people know the difference between the business version and the education version. The first difference is that when you are in an education tenant, when you click on Create Teams button, you have basically 4 types of teams. In business, you have 1 type of teams, right? When you click on the Create button, a team, right? And in educational tenant, you have the first type of team will be class team. The second will be professional learning community teams. The third one will be staff teams. And the fourth one will be anyone. So the question is, okay, I have 4 type of teams. So what is the difference between those kind of teams? And the main difference will be with the OneNote version. And that's the second difference between business version and education version, because when you create a Teams in educational tenant, you have a OneNote educational version. And the OneNote educational version is really different from the business version. Why is different? Because basically, when you create a OneNote education version, it comes with 4 spaces created by default with editable and read-only permission depending on the status. If you are a teacher, then or owner on your teams, you have a specific permission. And if you are a student or member of the teams, you have another permission. Basically, the 4 space will be the content library, where teachers will share materials for students. The content library is editable by teachers, but read only by students. The second one will be the collaboration space that will be editable for teachers and students. The third one will be the teacher private section. This is very funny, this name, the teacher private section, which will be visible only by teachers and not by students. So it's great for teachers who wants to have a sandbox to prepare materials before the classes.
Yep.
And the fourth ones will be individual students' portfolio. So this is very important to understand this, because I saw many schools who said to me, okay, I don't want to use OneNote. Okay, perfect. You don't want to use OneNote. So when it comes to a Teams class, then the question will be, okay, I want to share a folder, or I want to distribute a file to students, but this folder or these files will have to be read only. How do I make it? So if you are not using OneNote, then the solution will be to go on SharePoint, and on SharePoint to change the permission, etc., etc. So for teachers who are very, not
specific in their requirements, or they're used to using older or other technology, other tools.
Exactly. That's why OneNote is very great, because it is set by default.
Right.
So this is the second difference. Wait, yeah.
I was just going to say that there's so I see from doing community-based, like Ask Me Anything, AMA, Q&A around productivity, and there's often we'll get a question we're trying to understand, and then somebody as part of the panel will be like, oh, they're in the education side. That's kind of a rule of thumb, especially if you're going in for support. You get used to doing this as an information worker of, hey, I want to report a problem, a feature that's lacking, where you talk about, here's the version of Windows that I'm using, here's the browser version that I'm using, here's the update the version of all those things. You need to start with, I'm in the education version of Teams because it can
Exactly.
be very different.
Exactly. Exactly. That's why when schools want to, get some help from companies, most of the time the companies are very good in business tenant, but they do not know very well about the educational tenant. That's why sometimes it comes with misunderstanding or differences on deployment procedure.
Well,
Yeah.
clearly. Well, I think and you've kind of inferred here the change management. How important to schools is it to have a change management plan when deploying teams?
Yeah, this is very important. Some customer came to me and they complain about the low adoption of Microsoft 365. And when I ask them a lot of questions, and when you look closer, then you see there is no school leader engagement, no lead by example, no benefits identified, no clear IT governance rules, no real action time, no time dedicated, no change management plans. And
Right.
that's the point, because for most of the school, change management is an unknown process or sometimes associated by trainings. But trainings is a little part of change management. A change management is a structure and approach to change the entire organization. So it has to be seen globally and not at the scales of individuals. So in concrete terms, there are many steps, and the first steps, and this is the same thing for business, the first steps is to have a clear picture of your vision. This is really important. And when I'm telling you this is to be able to answer to why we are changing, what are the benefits, what are the risk of not changing, what tools should we keep or disable to avoid duplication, who is going to help me, how, when, and how do we know we will succeed. This is very important. This is the vision. The second step is to involve visible leadership. And what I'm telling you this is mainly the school leaders. I saw many schools who said to teachers, okay, teachers, you have to go to the cloud. Okay, but when you look at the administrative staff or school leaders, they continue to write mails to teachers. How come? They continue to send mails with attached file coming from their hard disk. How? It's
Well,
not possible.
I'll explain part of it is like, so I have in the drawer in front of me, I have a booklet of stamps that I've had for 3 years. I need to use them. I need to write those physical letters to use the stamps.
Yeah, yeah, exactly,
But
exactly.
it's difficult for people to change because especially when your schools in session, teachers and the leadership at schools, like their heads down focused on the kids. They're focused on their plans and the actual education process. And so they a lot of times, again, my impression and working with some clients in the space
Yeah,
is that they don't have the mindset set up around the time to understand, to learn the new technology, that adoption process that generally comes with it. You have to set up time for that.
yeah, exactly. When people told me that we do not have time for this or we have another thing to do, then I told them, okay, so you are a teacher and you teach students to learn something and you do not want to learn. How come? Can you explain it to me?
Right.
you know, this is
Well,
really interesting.
I was is it parallel. So I've been working on collaboration technology for
Yeah,
most of my career for at least the last 20 years. And yet the companies that I worked for in creating collaboration technology
yeah,
had some of the least friendly work from home, remote worker collaboration. We're building the technology to make that possible, and yet they were the most resistant to that. So I understand how teachers are pushed back on, they're so
yeah,
busy sharing in the structure and the course plan and the content, and that they
yeah,
don't again allot time to go and learn about the new technology and how
yeah,
can actually
exactly.
make them more productive.
Yeah, exactly. And most of the time is also a lack of communication. once you have set your vision, once you have your sponsor, then you have to communicate with purpose. And you have to communicate on key dates, you have to communicate on support, you have to communicate on tool use, and you have to communicate on trainings. This is very important. And who is doing the trainings? The pilot teams. You have to build a pilot teams. And in a school, the main difficulty is that you have to build a pilot teams with administrative staff, the non-teaching personnel, and you have to build also teams with the educators. And even you have to build a team with students, the students ambassador teams. And once you have it, what are the roles of these pilot teams is drive the change, showcase benefits to all, and provide supports. Supports means peer training, tutorials, content creation, etc., etc. And the sum of all these steps will enforce the adoption. But if you are missing one steps, then the adoption will be zero or will be very low.
I know in the corporate world, I mean, another big issue is IT governance. And a lot of people that aren't aware what the governance policies are until they overstep the boundaries, that they try to share, they don't have the right permissions. And so they kind of find out that way about what are our IT governance policies. So what is the role of IT governance within education?
Yeah, that is another, big issue in schools. Why I'm telling you that? Because most of IT staff in schools do not clearly understand what is cloud and how to manage cloud. And if they don't understand, there is actually two kind of people. The people who say, okay, I'm leaving it free. Okay,
Yeah.
this is like an open bar. Everything can do everything inside the teams. So when you have students who can search inside the platform, then the students will create groups, students will create teams, students will do a lot of things.
That's a lot of the questions that I see come into the AMA. It's where it's clearly it's an open system, and students who sometimes get bored and find out suddenly that they have access to areas they shouldn't have access to, or can have features, can do things. I see this, like they're removing teachers from the platform. Oh,
Exactly.
those
So
kids.
when someone ask me this question, I have to go to a process of very simple question. The first question is, have you controlled the team's group creation? If the answer is not, you have to do it. This is very important, especially in schools. The second question is, do you have a naming policy? This is also very important. The third question is, do you have an expiration policy? Do you have an archive policy with retention and deletion policy? Have you configured who can create private channels? This is also essentials because especially in schools, I saw many private channels abuse. So we do not run private channels abuse. And have you configured inside the Teams Administration Center, have you configured the meeting policy, the messaging policy, depending on the role of the user? And you can set up a policy on teachers' roles. You can set up policy on students' roles. That's why when you're doing it correctly, for example, on online classes, then you prevent anonymous user to join the meeting. You prevent students from scheduling a meeting. You limit the custom background, because I know many students who want to make fun with background. And if there is a problem, you can limit the background image, especially in online classes with Teams. And you prevent students to share contents or remove students from the meeting. And this comes with a clearly precise IT governance questions, and you have to go through that steps. If you do not have that IT governance, then it will be a real mess, a real mess. For example, last week, there is an IT staff who called me and said, Laurent, please help me. I have 300 groups. I don't know what are these groups. I don't know how it's coming. So you have to do it. And in educational version, there is the Teams class. The Teams class behind the Teams class, there is a group. You don't have to create the Teams class manually. This is no sense. There is a tool inside Teams called School Data Sync. This is free. You don't have to pay anything. And the School Data Sync will automate the creation of Teams classes based on CSV files. So you have to do it. And this point is unknown for most of the IT staff. So this is important to ask the IT staff to really understand this and not to put the cursor in a restrictive way. I give you two examples. Some IT staff will block the guest access in a tenant. But when you block this, there is a big problem, especially inside Teams class and OneNote class, when a teacher wants to share the contents with, for example, a company. And in this company, a student is doing a stage. I don't know the correct way in English.
Like project,
yeah,
right? Like a
or
internship,
internship or etc.
Mm-hmm.
So the company wants to see, okay, this student, what did he learn? What did she learn last week? What kind of materials can I get from the schools? And when you block the guest access, you cannot share this with an exterior. So this is important to have these kind of things. And the second example is I know also a lot of schools would disable the one-on-one chat in Teams. I understand because there are some cases of cyberbullying, etc., etc. But behind this, the question is, do you have a policy chart on Microsoft Teams? Did your students sign a policy chart for Microsoft Teams use? No, we do not have this. So yeah, if you do not have this, so students will have all the rights, all the things they want to do inside Teams. And the good thing is that Microsoft think about this, and it was maybe this year, 3 months ago. Now in Teams Admin Center, you have a supervised chat feature. A supervised chat feature is very interesting because you can set up restricted permission, limited permission, or full permission, depending on the status of the user, if it is a teacher or if it is a student. With limited restriction or restrictive permission, a student will not be able to chat with another student, but a student will be able to chat with the teachers. This is important because when you disable chat for students, there is a big problem, especially in a pandemic situation when student is not at schools and when a teacher wants to communicate with the students. If the one-on-one chat is disabled for these students, you cannot communicate with these students.
Right. For everybody, right?
Yeah. So that's why the supervised chat is very essential to understand and to configure.
But it's I mean, you basically just kind of talked through, I mean, why it's so important to have that, IT governance strategy in place, the change management aspect, and be having conversations about these. I think you've also made the case for not breaking the out of the box, the templates, the provisioning templates that Microsoft for Education has gone and built these solutions specifically for this. Like when you, as part of those discussions, your IT team and with the leadership at the school to understand that if we're going to make decisions where we're not going to use OneNote and we're going to use this alternate, then what are the impacts to everything else that we're doing? If we're going to leave it wide open so anybody can do anything, here are the impacts. So go in with your eyes wide open about the impacts to that and have those discussions. But that's why if you start with what's out of the box and then have those discussions as people start using it and you want to slowly open up more permissions, and that's the way that you need to approach it. So then you understand what are the core capabilities, what we can and can't do. And then as you add other features, you can have those discussions around, okay, what are the other impacts within the platform?
Exactly. This is a discussion between three parts: the school leaders, the IT, and the teacher representative. If those three parts are not talking each other, then there is a big problem.
Right. Well, let's talk specifically about teachers and their daily practices,
Yeah,
because I think that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where a lot of the questions that I see out that are being asked in various online communities and Microsoft Tech community
yeah,
are around practitioners and
yeah.
issues that they're experiencing. So, what are some of those daily practices, and what are some of the pitfalls that they should avoid?
Yeah, first, and I said I mentioned it on my blog post. When you are a teacher and working with the teams, the first thing to consider is that it, is it a solo teams or is it a full class teams? A solo teams is one owner and students. A full class teams is owners, different teachers and students. And that's the big difference. And most of the times, schools do not consider this. They go they go on a full class teams. But when you go on a full class teams, then the OneNote is shared with different owners, and the communication inside teams is shared between different owners. So that can, you know, cause some confusion. So that is the first thing to consider. The pitfalls, I saw many pitfalls. I have many examples of pitfalls of teachers. The first one will be do not use OneDrive to share file and folder with students. OneDrive is not the tool to do it. If you want to share file, if you want to share a folder with students, then put it on a OneNote in content library inside OneNote. This is the way it has to be. The second thing is that when they understand the chat, they will make a, you know, a big abuse of hot mark and the name of the team. But if you use hot mark and name of the teams, it means that the information will have to be generic, and most of the times it's not generic. you know so you have to have a clear comprehension of mentioning, and that's why inside teams, especially in class teams, I highly recommend teachers to create tags. You can create tags inside teams, and the first thing to create is a tag students and tag teachers and maybe a tag project. And if you are doing this, then the communication will be very clear inside the conversation channel. Then the third pitfalls is you have to think about channel structures. It is it is the main thing, and most of the time they do not understand. I saw many class teams with an unique general channel. No, it's not possible. It's impossible to work on this way. And I saw also teams with general channels and 20 private channels. What's the purpose? What's the purpose of this? If it is a teams, you have to collaborate. So you don't have to set 20 private channels. So basically, the way that you set up channels will depend on the type of teams class. If it is a solo teams, you can set up channels, for example, with skills, reading skills, writing skills, etc., or chapter, semester, etc. But if you are in a full class teams shared by many teachers, then there is no option to build a channels. Channels will be the name of the, for example, English or mathematics or physics, etc.
Mhm.
So that is the big difference. And you have also to decide what students, what a member can do inside a team. You have some owner permission inside the teams, and you can decide. If your IT staff did not set up nothing, then you have to set up manually. If you are an owner, for example, who can create a channel, who can create private channel, who can use the Giphy, the memes, etc. So you can set up manually inside the teams. And this is the same thing when you're running online classes. If your IT staff did not set up anything, then you can configure by yourself. For example, you have a Teams invitation meetings on your calendar, and on your calendar you go to meeting option, and in meeting option, the first thing to do is who can bypass the lobby? Me.
Yeah.
Me only. Who can present? Me only. If you are doing this, then they will set up presenter and attendant. And attendant will be students. And if students are attendant, they will not be able to share contents. They will not be able to disable the mic or remove students from the meeting. This is important to know. And if, for example, you forgot to set up the meeting option before the online classes, no worries, because you can do it directly inside during the meeting. If you are an organizer, you can, for example, disable the chat, you can disable the camera for students, you can disable the mic for students, you can upgrade a students from attendee to presenter. So you can do a lot of things.
Yeah, I'd say if you find that you're having to go in and repeatedly at the beginning of classes or projects and change those settings, that is a conversation you should have with your IT team about maybe we need to change the default settings. We need to lock this down a little bit more because again, if it's locked down at that level, what is what are the templates? What are the standards that we as a school we say, hey, this is how we're going to do these things. Understand the impacts to other classes, or is it happening to everyone, or do they still have the controls to go and open things back up for those groups that want to have greater control? But
Exactly.
that's again, that conversation should be happening between leadership,
Exactly.
IT, and the teachers themselves. Well,
Exactly.
Laurent, just to last question here with the last minute that we have,
Yep.
are there any new Microsoft Teams features that are approaching that we should be looking for education?
I will be talking about the feature that are now in tenant because the coming features, I know that America is good because
But
it is
yeah, they're
deployed directly, but in
right,
Europe, a tenant, you have
right.
to wait 3 or 4 months.
And there are
But
things that are out in the roadmap again, people that can go and you look at Microsoft
yeah,
product roadmap
actually,
as well.
yeah, this summer there are many good features, especially for educational tenant, and these features is first for assignment inside a Teams class. Before you have the only choice to set to submit assignment for the whole class or individual students. And the question from teacher would be, okay, but if my students are working in groups, can they submit assignment in groups? And at the beginning of this year, it was not possible, but right now, and it has come to my tenant in Europe, so I think it's globally available. You have the group assignment inside assignment. So this is good. It means that if there is some group work, students will be able to submit or turn in an assignment in the name of the group. So this is good to have in mind. The second features is this is a very little features, but very good, is the feature inside the team meetings to lower all raised hand. Because most of students click on a raise hand, they ask the question and they forgot to lower hands. So in terms of communication, this is complicated. So right now, teachers can have a button to lower all raise hand. So this is the second feature. And the third features is actually, it's not a start feature. It is an update of a tool called Insight. Insight is specific to educational tenant. I don't think it exists in business version. I did not see this. And basically, Insight is a tool to track student activity inside Teams. This is, this is great. This is big because with Insight tools, this is a free tool, so you do not have to pay anything. With these tools, a teacher or school leaders will be able to track which channels students visited, what tabs students view. If a student open a file, what files? If a student open a OneNote page, what OneNote page? When? You have the date and you have the time. And if students post a message, what are the most active students in the teams, and the inactive students, they are spotlight in red. So this is easy for teachers to see, okay, I have a problem because this student is not active. there's nothing inside the team. So you have a dashboard. This dashboard is visible only with teachers. Students will not access to this dashboard. And with dashboards, you can have a lot of information about the students' digital activities or students' digital engagement.
And yeah, that's important too, because you can have, just like there are different styles of teaching and different styles of learning, that just because a child is not very active within some of the features within Teams, but could be very active, in the class itself, in the sessions as they're ongoing. So it's just another slice of data, another way of looking at that, and for the teacher to have more information about making sure that in that virtual world that people are interacting, and if they're not, hey, here's steps that I can go and take there.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much. I know a ton of information that you've shared. I really appreciate that. And so thank you, Laurent, for joining me this morning. And of course, for everybody, thank you for joining this session. Of course, please subscribe to the Office 365 Hours, get notifications about upcoming shows. And we'll be back on the first and third Wednesday morning of every month, always at 11 a.m. Eastern. So thank you for watching.
Thank you, Christian. Thanks you all.